My guest today is Seth Silvers, CEO and visionary at StoryOn, a premier podcast agency helping growing businesses turn podcasts into strategic tools for trust and long-term impact. Seth fell in love with the power of story as a teenager and has spent his career helping businesses communicate with clarity and purpose. He's worked with many of the top 100 business podcasts in the world while helping smaller creators like Delay The Decay launch shows that solve real problems for specific audiences. Seth has been married for 9 years. He has his first child arriving in 2 months. And when he's not growing his business, he loves playing games with family and friends. This is such a blast to have you on, Seth. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. I'm super happy to be here. It's been fun to see over the last year, your show kind of come from idea to, I think now you're in the 40s of episodes, which is awesome. So it's super fun to actually be on the show. And also, we've known each other for most of my life, not most of yours, but most of my life.
Yeah, and that's a testimony to God's grace that you, after knowing me that long, that you would still get on this podcast with me. Yeah, I've known you for a long time, and when I saw your career taken off from afar, and when I started getting the inkling that I was supposed to do a podcast, I had no idea where to start. And you and your team were so helpful on the front end, and not just with the practical things of the right equipment and the platforms and just how to craft a good podcast, but some of the most helpful advice you gave me that is propelling me even today, Seth, is you really need to do this every week for a year, because most podcasts don't make it to a year. And let's take it out a year. Don't pay too much attention to the analytics along the way, and then let's reevaluate it at the end of the year. And so here I am on, I think you're going to be 43, coming up on a year. I'm having more fun that a guy in my stage of life should be having. And speaking of storytelling, is just hearing people's stories. That's really what this is about, is hearing inspiring people like you talk about their imperfect journey towards living out their giftedness. So that's what we're doing here today. And there is one question that I start all of my episodes with, and you know it, and it's what is one habit or discipline that you are fighting for today to keep you moving up and to the right?
It's a good question. I think the one that I'm fighting for today really is like the personal, like the physical health side of things, of figuring out how do I make the side of whether it's going to the gym. I was talking to my wife the other day. I was like, I think I just need to like have some version, like I need to sweat. I need to sweat or be active. Like, some days that might be a walk. Some days that might be like an at-home workout. Some days I might be going to the gym. But I think that's been something that's been really challenging for me to make a habit and make a rhythm. And it's been easy to do when it's convenient. But then, I travel or different things happen and I get out of that rhythm. And it hasn't really been something that's been non-negotiable. For me, it's been, I say, like inconsistently consistent. And I think that I'm realizing my job is fairly sedentary. I'm sitting, looking at a computer or sitting on Zoom calls most of the day. And I love my job, but realizing, okay, the career that I'm in, I'm sitting a lot, I'm not super active, but I'm also wanting to lead people. I'm realizing, hey, we want to build a team. It requires a lot of me being able to be creative and fresh with my brain and with how I'm approaching things. And a lot of that I'm realizing comes back to the physical health side of things. So I would say that's probably the habit that I am currently like fighting for the most, to really just make it a part of the day rather than something that happens when it's convenient or easy.
And you are pushing into your mid-30s right there, and that seems to be the time where we're going, okay, I've pushed hard for 10, 15 years, and there's some things that I'm sacrificing. And oftentimes for creators, builders, people that have ambition, oftentimes it's our health. So I'm really excited that you're going to be intentionally intentional in that.
Yeah, it's a journey for sure. And it's probably not the first time that I've wanted to, take that more seriously. But I think there's, been some indicators and things and people that I've heard that have kind of made me realize like, oh, this is probably, I think the ROI, I'm a business owner, so I think about ROI all the time. It's like, I think the ROI that I get from every other area of my life is probably elevated by investing in this area. Like I'm probably more patient if I am physically healthy. I'm probably sleeping better. I'm probably, getting more out of less hours working. A lot of those things. And so I really do think it's kind of a core function and discipline that I'm working on.
So we're going to talk a lot about strategy and the why behind podcasts, why people do it, why they shouldn't do it, and whatnot. But before we get into strategy, I want to get into your story. You're a storyteller, and I know a lot of your story, but my audience doesn't. How did you get into storytelling and marketing and podcasting? What drew you into the space, Seth?
Yeah, it wasn't really until I want to say my junior year where I took a marketing class. It might have actually been my senior year where I just like had credits to fill. Like I think I needed like a few credits left. And so I was like, all right, I'll start taking an interesting class. So I took I took another marketing class, and I think it was Marketing 101. And I got to I ran into this teacher in an airport a couple months ago, and I was able to tell her this story. But I remember in that classroom, the like language that they were using to describe what we know as marketing and content and storytelling, I had never really known the like words for it. And so it was this setting where all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there's like formal words and industries around these things that I like. And so it wasn't really until end of college that I kind of realized, oh, I like marketing. It was a lot earlier that I realized the power of storytelling and that I loved bringing people together and different things like this. And you might remember some of this story, but when I was 16, I had this vision while I was praying, and I remember seeing in this vision young people from all over our area of Northern Colorado coming together for these nights of worship to really celebrate and say we all are from different backgrounds and different churches and all this stuff, but we all want to see more of Jesus in our community. And I remember seeing this vision. I'd never seen a vision before. And a little over 4 months later, I had physical photos from a photographer that was at that event, and I'd seen those photos before. They were the photos that I'd seen in that vision 4 months earlier. And I still remember bringing a bunch of friends together at my parents' house, and us sitting in the living room and kind of like sharing this vision and kind of saying like, how are we going to do this? And everybody was like, all right, let's like everybody, a lot of my friends were like, all right, let's help. I remember, doing stuff with Joey at these events, and a lot of this, so many amazing stories. And we got to do, we did probably 30 or 40 of these events over the next like 10 years, and some in other states and across the country. And what we realized with that was the unity of a singular story. When we were promoting these events, when I was working with youth pastors, when I was going in, I spent a lot of the last 2 years of my high school years actually less emphasizing sports, which I had always thought I was going to go do. And I was spending my evenings networking with youth pastors and getting to know the ministry world. And my dad was graciously signing me out of school so I could go to youth pastor luncheons when I was like 17 years old. And some of these amazing things. And when I was talking with him, I realized we have to tell one story. There's got to be like one goal of these events. And at the time, that was, can we all agree that we want to see more young people experiencing Jesus? We might disagree on what that looks like, but we can all agree on that story. So, from that, I started figuring out, okay, now how do we get people to these events? So I remember, creating in Windows Movie Maker, creating a video, promo video to like go and show at all these youth groups. And I remember learning how to design little graphics and then figuring out how do I raise money to go and pay a couple $100s to print 4,000 of these postcards, and then how do I get people at all the schools to go and put these postcards in lockers, and all of these skills that I just, in my mind, it was just like, okay, well, we have to we have to figure out how to get people here. So we probably need a video and we probably need these things. And so I grew to develop some of these marketing skills and storytelling skills, but I didn't really know what they were for or what it was. And so then as I got into college, I realized that my passion was a lot more for making an impact through business as opposed to ministry. And so a couple years after college, I started StoryOn, which is the current company. And I was doing kind of small business content marketing. So blogs, emails, social media content, videos. And then about 5 years into that journey, started a podcast and just loved it. I loved the like authentic feel of podcasting. And pretty soon after that, I realized I was doing way too much in business. We were doing way too many services. And we were kind of at this like crux point in business where I was working way harder and making less money than if I just went and worked for somebody else. And it was like, I don't think this is why people start businesses. And so we decided we were going to take 4 months. We were going to take 6 months and just focus on helping as many businesses as we could start a podcast. And if it worked, then we'd keep doing it. And if it didn't, then I was going to quit and go get a job. And that was about 6 years ago.
That's when you went out on your own officially.
Yeah. And I'd kind of been doing freelance marketing work, but then that was kind of the point of, that was where we really shifted to owning podcasting for businesses and just focusing on that. And that was one of the better decisions that I've made.
Last night, I played golf with a friend of mine and his 22-year-old son. And his son was just talking about I don't know what I'm going to do for a living. I'm not sure what the pathway is. And I see so many younger people that are just maybe anxious about what's ahead. And your story is compelling in so many ways, Seth, but just even seeing that you stepped into what it is you felt like the Lord was calling you to do, not knowing really what the end result would be. Would you have any encouragement for, there's probably not many high schoolers listening to us, but early 20s, mid 20s, people are going like, what am I supposed to do with my life?
Yeah, two conversations with two different pastors actually come to mind that I had in my early 20s. One was with my current pastor, Aaron Stern. And I just remember him being like, you probably will have an idea of what you want to do with your life by the time you're 30. And now that I'm 35, I'm like, who knows what I'll be doing when I'm 50. But when I was 20, that was really encouraging because it kind of gave this pressure of like, I don't know, I don't have to have it all figured out. Like I might, and that's okay. Like I might try some things that I love or that I think I'll love and that I end up not loving. And I might stumble into some things that I really end up loving. And the other conversation or message I remember hearing, I was in high school and I remember hearing Louis Giglio speak. And he was talking about how when we're in high school, we're, wondering like, do I go to Harvard or do I go to Yale? And we're praying and we're talking to pastors about it. And we're like, God, do you want me to go to Harvard? Do you want me to go to Yale? We're putting all this pressure on it. And ultimately, we have a moment at a church service. We feel like I'm supposed to go to Harvard. And so you go to Harvard and it's hard. Like school's hard. You have some hard things going with friendships. You get in a relationship and that doesn't go well. You make some poor decisions in that relationship. You get to the end of the year and you realize, man, would it have been different if I would have gone to Yale? And then he painted this picture where you kind of like live with this wonder and with this regret throughout your life of, maybe all the hard things are maybe it would have been different if I went to Yale. And then, theoretically you die, you get to talk to God and say, should I have gone to Yale? And he pretty much says, I never cared if you went to Harvard or Yale. I cared if you honored me throughout wherever you went. And if you carried my name to Harvard or to Yale. And that was always really encouraging for me. There's a verse in the Psalms where God says, I've placed you in an open field. And it's like, what do you do in an open field? If you put a kid in an open field, they're just going to like run around and have fun. And I think that we like make it too serious a lot of times. And I've found a lot of encouragement by knowing that like it matters more that I honor God and that I stay integrous to my own values in whatever I'm doing. I think that matters more than what I am doing. And so as a young 20-year-old, it's like, try things. Like my wife's in her 30s and she just went back to school a couple of years ago. And we said, even if you do this for a handful of years, like that's fine. Like, you know, if you enjoy it and you get value out of it and you get to help people, that's great. So I'm an advocate for like less pressure on knowing exactly what you need to do and more on being who we're supposed to be throughout it.
That's really helpful, Seth. Yeah, my life phrase and the motto for this show is direction, not perfection. You know, just get on the direction of honoring the Lord that you feel like He has you on, and don't worry about perfection. He's gonna adjust your steps along the way, and it takes off so much pressure. So thank you for sharing that. I've just got a heart for. I don't know if my kids experienced this. Maybe they did. They probably did. But I just want to take the pressure off young people to just take the next right step, and then the Lord will guide you along the way. So really helpful. So you've got some massive podcasts that you work with, but you also work with people like me, people who have businesses who have an idea of starting a podcast. I'm going to start with a negative, which they say that isn't always the best place to start. But what are some reasons for not starting a podcast?
Yeah, so I will say like most of the shows and people that we work with, they're usually trying to launch a podcast to complement their business in some way. And so I think in the industry, like I think there's people that start podcasts as a hobby. I think there's podcasts that are a business. So it's like your Joe Rogans, your Caller Daddies, like those big shows where like their model is to grow audience and then to sell that audience for sponsorships. The third option is really where a podcast supports a business. And that's kind of our main area is this podcast is designed to supplement a community or a business that then you can serve those people, those listeners in other ways in a longer time frame. So the flags that we look for is one, if they're not like they don't have a long-term mindset. So that's why I encouraged you last year. Like I would encourage you to do this for a year and really see, like, do you like it? Is this something that you're getting value out of? And is this something that other people are getting value out of? Podcasting is something that there's so many people that start a podcast and then quit. I think the data is always floating a little bit, but the loose data is like 80 to 90% of people that start podcasts don't even make it to episode 10. So the joke is if you want to be a top 10%, if you want to be a top 10% podcast, just show up because most people don't. And so I think it's really interesting. So I think if you don't have, like, if you're not thinking about it long-term and you're really looking at like, I need results fast. I think the second thing is if you're looking to make money really, really quickly and you're like looking at this as, okay, I need some more revenue. And so I'm going to start a podcast. If you're going the sponsorship route, that's really hard because you need a lot of listeners to make sponsors. You can do it with lower listeners, but it shouldn't be like, you're not like creating a job. And then on the business side, it just takes time to grow. And you also have to have a business that's mature enough to turn that audience into customers. So it's usually a mindset thing. We're looking for kind of the red flags of, if you're trying to make money really fast or you're thinking this is going to grow really fast and you're kind of going to have this platform, then those are red flags. And the last thing I'll mention is if the primary reason that you want to start a podcast is for reasons that solely benefit you, I'm not super interested in that. That doesn't mean there's not other people in podcasting that wouldn't help you with that. But I think that a podcast is a beautiful way to inspire, educate, entertain an audience and bring value to their life. And so that's kind of like a personal ethos thing. Like the ones that we want to work with are ones that are more like audience focused, less host focused. So those are things we look out for.
Yeah, really compelling. There's a series of books that I was turned on to, just small books called The Go-Giver, and it's just about when we live a life that is always about me and receiving and not giving, it's first of all, it's not a very satisfying, it's not a very satisfying life. Making money. So 40 some episodes in, I mean, doing a podcast is net negative for me financially right now. And I have no idea some of the other things that I've created, whether it be 40-day fight or my coaching, other things that I'm doing. The podcast probably helps with that. I hope it does, because it's everything I do is with the same aim. I want to bring the same message to people, but like just bottom line, profit and loss, it costs me money every month. And I speak to this. I think a lot of the part-time podcasters or the people that want to do it, they can just set up a studio in their home. This is my home right now. I have the right equipment, but if you don't have a compelling why, and you don't plan on, you got to spend money. I think you've got to spend money. I mean, I couldn't have done this if I didn't spend some money on the front end to hire StoryOn. And, I've got an editor, thanks to you, that if I didn't have an editor, nobody would listen to it because of all my ums and my ahs and my spit and all of that. But to do a podcast well, you need to hire somebody. So I don't know. I mean, I think most people can't sustain a podcast. This is just Dan Hardy, a podcaster, because they have grand illusions of being, some big podcaster with 1,000 followers and making money. And I mean, if I was honest, even today, I would love to break even on the podcast. I'd love to see some tangible results. But more importantly, if I keep hearing there's value from people, I'm going to find the money and I'm going to do it because I'm having fun with it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to illustrate like that value of it, of you're making an impact, people are getting value out of it. I think on the business side too, we often have the conversation with clients of sure, you might be net negative on a podcast in a sense that you're not getting direct revenue in a sense of like sponsorships or Google AdSense or something like that. But are your clients listening to the podcast? And is it maybe keeping, your clients around where maybe, if one of your clients listens to 10 episodes of the podcast, that's an extra 7 to 10 hours per year that they're spending building trust with you. And so, if that keeps them from a 12-month engagement to an 18-month engagement, then that is revenue that the podcast is influencing. And we see with bigger companies where, they're constantly battling turnover and having to hire new people. And so we've launched private podcasts that are only available for the employees of that company. And so we talk to them about what's the benefit of your team being more engaged and more connected to the owner of the company and being more engaged to the value that your company is bringing. Rather, do they feel like it's not just a job, but maybe like they're actually serving people? Because if those people stay with your company for an extra 2 years and maybe you're turning over 20% less people, the economics start making sense. So you kind of have to look at these other things. I do also, I'm an advocate that you should spend money on podcasting in some way. And we always say, like, if you're not willing to buy a $100 mic, then you should not start a podcast. At least like buy a microphone. The thing I love about podcasting is how accessible it is. So you can buy a $100 mic, you can start it in your own office, in your own home. You invested a little bit to get some coaching and consulting, and I think that puts you ahead a couple more steps. But we've seen people that start a podcast on their phone. I wouldn't recommend it, but there's value in it. We've seen people that buy a $100 mic. We've seen people that build $10,000 studios. We've seen companies that spend $500,000 to launch 10 episodes of a podcast. So it's like it all depends on where you're at. Internally, one of our values is sustainable excellence, and we define that as doing the best you can with what you have. So that means that you should be looking at what resources do I have currently, and what does it look like for me to do the best version of this podcast? So that's kind of where I think like you should be willing to invest time or money into a podcast, but you shouldn't be comparing yourself to your favorite podcast that has 1 million followers. You should be really comparing yourself to yourself and looking at every quarter, every 6 months, how can you get a little bit better? Because you're probably going to have more resources to be able to invest, whether it's money, time, knowledge. You can probably make your podcast a little bit better every quarter. And that's kind of the thing that we advocate for with clients.
Let's get practical. Have you ever, speaking about business, have you guys seen let's say a trades company, a roofing company, a plumbing company, electrical company, start a podcast for either their industry or to add value to the community of builders? Have you seen something like that happen?
Yeah, we have. We've seen it in like foundation repair. So we've seen it in the parking industry. We've seen it we're talking with somebody right now that we're likely going to be launching a podcast for them, and it's actually in the painting company. And so for them, they're growing this painting company. They're growing pretty aggressively right now, and they have pretty aggressive growth goals. And so for them, they actually want to grow over the next 5 years through acquisitions, by acquiring other painting companies and other locales. So for them, it makes a lot of sense because they're helping the industry get better. And so in that, they're building relationships with other people in the painting industry that are doing a good job. And so when they're ready to bring other companies into their portfolio, they likely already have those relationships. And if they don't end up doing that with those people, then they're still helping their industry as a whole. You do have to have the kind of all the rising tide lifts all ships. You have to have that mentality with it. But we definitely see like very hyper niche trades industries that say we want to do this for our industry. And one kind of example that I'll give, this is something we subscribe to very much. So I probably give away, I don't know if I can say too much, but I'm like, I give away a lot. And I'm always happy to like share knowledge. And I made a LinkedIn post a couple months ago and kind of just said, what are people seeing that is actually growing a podcast right now? And there was a lot of comments on that post of people that were saying, here's what I'm doing. And I kind of like asked clarifying questions to a lot of people. I was like, that's a good idea, but have you done that on your show and did it work? You know, is this theory or is this practice? And one person who I know, and he's fun, and he commented and he said, pay me my consulting fee and I'll tell you what I'm seeing. And he was kind of joking, but also kind of serious. And I stepped back and I didn't make that post thinking, okay, people are going to hire us because of this post. But when you look at it and you look at if somebody is coming to that post wanting to learn, are they going to look at us who's aggregating these answers? And we're saying, hey, we want to create a space where the industry can get better. Would they hire us to see what we're learning, or would they hire this person who's not sharing anything unless you pay them? It's two very different vibes. And I think that kind of like that illustrated that value for us really well of, I think if you're willing to help your industry, it's going to build goodwill and people are going to want to hire you to implement what you've learned by helping your industry. And that's something that we see pretty often.
Seth, speaking of philosophy, strategy, you talk a lot about that podcasting isn't necessarily a sales tool. It's a trust tool. And I think you've been talking about that. But would you expand on that?
Yeah, I think the people that it was when I was early in the days of StoryOn where I was trying to figure out like, why does this storytelling thing work? Why am I willing to pay a little bit more for products that I know the story behind the company, or I see the content they're creating and it feels authentic? And I realized one that we typically buy from people that we trust. So I'm going to buy from, I'd rather buy from somebody I trust rather than a stranger. And then second, I realized that the people there's a pretty direct correlation between people I trust and how much time I've spent with them. Not always. There's always, we all have good friends that you see once every handful of years, and the trust is immense and those relationships are deep. But typically time kind of equals trust. And so I think that from that, realizing if we're working backwards from, there's a lot of amazing companies doing amazing things. There's also how do we get those companies to stand out from companies that are doing average things? We probably want to get more people spending time with that company, better understanding their values, their stories, their impact, why they do what they do. And I think one of the best ways to be able to stack the amount of time that people are spending is through podcasting. Because, and this is getting a little bit nuts and bolts, but on an Instagram post, somebody, it can be good, but people are maybe spending a few seconds with you, a really good on YouTube, a really good kind of average view duration or length of watching might be 8 to 10 minutes. And on podcasting, most people are spending 60 to 80, they're listening to 60 to 80% of the podcast. And so they're spending 30, 40, 50 minutes with you. And that's pretty substantial. So for us, there's a lot of talk in the industry right now of just using podcasting as a sales tool and just interviewing your ideal clients because they might not want to go to lunch with you because they think you're going to sell them at lunch, but they'll be like, oh, I'll come on a podcast. That's cool. So I've seen a lot that it's kind of this like reverse bait and switch sales tool. And for us, you can go and do that. Like you can go and do whatever you want. But for us, we see podcasting work best when it's focused on how do we build more trust with an audience? And I think that is needed in the business world today.
In my former worlds, as you know, I was a financial consultant for 20 years. I managed the people's money, and then I was a pastor for 18 years. And I do find that the people that trusted me and would have grace with my flaws are the people that saw me week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out. It's one thing putting a proposal across the page, but it's something else if somebody can actually not just hear you once or see you once, but spend time with you. I've never thought of a podcast in that way, and that's exactly what's happening. So thanks for that. You work with some massive podcasts, people like Patrick Lencioni, April Dunford, and there's others. Now, those are big names. If every podcaster was honest, they go, I kind of like to be in that space and make the money that they're making. What makes them unique, these big podcasts?
I mean, it's usually not chance or luck. So I think the people that have very large platforms that we've had the chance to work with, they all are very, very experienced in very specific areas. So with Alex and Layla Hermosi, and we got the privilege to work with them for about 2 years, they got very, very good at building businesses. And particularly, they started in the gym world and kind of in the fitness space. They got very good at businesses. And the important thing is Alex shared everything. As he was growing these businesses massively, he didn't hold anything back. He was sharing what they were doing. He was sharing what they were learning. He was sharing, trying to help other people do the same. And that was what enabled him to be able to build a really good platform. With Patrick Lencioni, he's been writing New York Times bestselling books for over 25 years. He's been doing organizational consulting and been, kind of slowly but surely building one of the best consulting firms in the country for decades. And that's what a lot of people don't realize is there's so many people, they're doing it for a long time. April Dunford, you also mentioned her. She's very well known in the B2B tech product positioning world. So very, very specific space, but she's very good at what she does in that specific world. And so, a lot of people don't know who April Dunford is. I personally haven't met anybody that works in product positioning for a tech company that doesn't know who she is. But she doesn't care if other people know who she is because it's like in this lane. And so I think that the people, I've heard the phrase niche down to blow up, and I think there's a lot of value in that. I think that most people that have very large platforms today, they got started by being extremely good in an extremely narrow field.
Would you say that they know exactly who their audience is? They know who they're speaking to?
I think at the start, yeah. I think as you get bigger, as a platform gets bigger, I think it's harder.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more challenging when you know that 1 million people are going to see what you do or whatnot. So, but yeah, I think there's an extreme focus on the audience.
If I heard you right, the podcast is a way to enhance what they were already doing. It was to bring forth who they already were. It wasn't, I'm doing this thing way over here, and I'm going to take a complete pivot and do the podcast and speak about something else. It's already who they were and what they were doing.
Yeah, it's another channel to go deeper with their current audience. And what we see is, I think every organization, you kind of have your core audience, and this is current customers. This is probably people that they've already engaged with you in some way. Maybe they're on your email list or something, but they know who you are and what you're about. And so we see that with that, there are people that are in that core audience. And then beyond that, there is kind of this fringe audience. Most people try to grow their platform and their business by adding more people to the fringe audience, hoping they'll go to the core audience. I actually think it's backwards. I think if you create content that serves your core audience really, really well, what they do is they tell their friends about it. That's when we see word of mouth, is where, you focus on the people that are in your core audience that know who you are. And what happens, I still think that the main way that podcasts grow, and there's some data to show this, so this isn't just total theory. The main way that podcasts are growing is still people telling people about podcasts. I feel like every quarter there might be like a podcast episode that I listen to that just like I love, and I end up sharing it with like 10 or 15 people. And I think that there's still this element of sharing podcasts with people that help solve their problems. And I think that's kind of how platforms grow, is through word of mouth.
If I'm a business owner and I'm thinking about starting a podcast to build trust and to enhance what I'm already doing, how important is it, Seth, to understand other marketing vehicles, specifically social media? How does social media and podcasting work together?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's tricky because I think they're kind of two different strategies. I think that the benefit right now is it's probably easier than ever before to create content at scale, where a podcast is a really good tool to where, like with this episode, you're probably going to have, a handful of social media clips that can go out on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and YouTube Shorts and all of those places. You can probably turn this episode into a newsletter if you want. Like, it's getting fairly easy to be able to repurpose podcast content. And I think that is worth knowing kind of how to do. But your expectations have to be different. I think social media content is more, it's more about discovery. It's, if you're posting short form content, most of the people that are seeing that content are probably seeing it. They're probably brand new to your platform. And so that's just a different focus than a 60-minute episode where you're speaking directly to your audience. So I think the content is like a funnel where you kind of have shorter form content at the top. And ideally, you're trying to get people to engage with your content deeper. And I think a podcast is kind of at the bottom of that as far as like time spent and time on brand and trust. So I think it's important. I also will say, we can talk about what's ideal, but again, going back to sustainable excellence, I'd rather people do one thing and focus on it really well than like feeling the pressure of I have to do all this social media stuff. There's definitely benefit to it, but that doesn't mean that you should do it. There's also benefit to me. Like, I could think of a million things that would be good for me to do, but I only have so much time in the day, so I have to be selective.
So I'm gonna ignore pretty much everything you just said and ask another question about Substack. Everybody that's doing a podcast, I'm seeing them also writing on Substack. Talk to me a little bit about that. Do you know a little bit about Substack? And
I think Substack. I mean, Substack I would kind of put in the like newsletter realm of things, but which I think are great. I think newsletters and podcasts go really well together. Particularly because you own that traffic. Like, people are opting in to you, and then they are generally getting notified when you publish something. That's not true on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, different social media sites. Like, even if you have 100,000 followers on YouTube, that doesn't guarantee that all of them are even going to see your video. So I think with a newsletter and with a podcast, it's still some of the mediums where it's kind of still like traffic that you would own. Like you have a more direct connection. And then Substack is getting more into podcasting. So now it's possible. I think if you're a paying Substack member, I think you can actually host a podcast on Substack for free. So I think Substack and then Beehive, which is a competitor of theirs, is doing really similar things as well. So I think it's a great tool because it's making it easier for people to be able to consume deep content in the way that they prefer. And then the cool thing about Substack is there's growth mechanisms built into it. And so they're constantly, if I were to subscribe to your Substack will identify other Substacks that are similar and say, hey, you might like this and you might like this. And so I think people are seeing their Substack channels grow just because of the distribution that Substack is doing, which I think is really unique.
A lot of Substack newsletters are free. I see people are also charging for it. And I'm starting to see that with some podcasts as well, where they'll let you listen to the first 10 minutes of it for free, and then you're locked out unless you buy a membership. When should somebody be thinking about that, or ever having a more of a membership model where you pay a monthly fee or annual fee to get access to the podcast and the newsletter?
I think your free stuff has to be extremely valuable. And I think that people usually, that's where I think a lot of people miss with that stuff is their free content sucks, but then their paid content is really good. And then they're expecting that people are going to assume that's kind of the disconnect. So I think that it is a volume game. And so I think that I think premium content is becoming a lot more popular. My recommendation to people, similar to what I told you a year ago, it's like, I think that you should focus on just serving, if you have the ability to, if you have the patience to, focus on creating an audience and then worry about the monetization. And a lot of people come up with these really grand monetization plans, like, I'm going to have a paid Substack and I'm going to have a sponsor and I'm going to have all this. They haven't even created an episode. You don't even know if anybody likes it. And so you could have the best monetization plan in the world, but if nobody's consuming your free content, then none of it matters. On the flip side, if you have an audience, if you have proven that you can create content that people like and that people talk about and your audience is growing, you're going to have plenty of opportunities on how to monetize that audience to be more sustainable. So a lot of times it's just backwards. I think we have to focus on developing the audience and then monetizing. That's kind of been my experience.
Do you know the numbers on podcasts? Just roughly speaking, who was listened to it 10 years ago, and then what are the numbers today compared to 10 years ago, and where do you see podcasts heading?
Yeah, so there's loosely around 5 million podcasts that have started at some point.
5 million.
5 million people have started a podcast. In the last 30 days, there's about 350,000 that have published a new episode. So about 8%. Out of those 350,000, which we would consider active podcasters, a top 1% podcast generates about 4,000 to 5,000 downloads or plays within 30 days for an episode. So it's very interesting. Comparing to YouTube, in the last 30 days, there is over 100 million YouTube channels that have published a video, and there's about 350,000 podcasts. So I recognize they're a little bit different mediums, but podcasting is still really, really young. And with most of the people that we work with, when we actually break it down to what are you wanting to start a podcast about, who are you wanting to reach, who's doing it well, and who's doing it consistently, there rarely is more than 10 to 15 competitors. in the market. And we always tell people, like, if you and I both live in kind of Fort Collins, Windsor area, there's a handful of pizza shops, and you don't see Domino's not opening up a pizza shop because they're like, well, there's already a Pizza Hut in Fort Collins. They're just like, we're just going to do it better, or we're going to do it different, or Crazy Carl's, we're going to add cream cheese to our pizza and make it cheap. And so that's where it's interesting, because there's this phrase, and I'm sure you've heard it, I'm sure you've said it, everybody has a podcast. It's just not true. Everybody doesn't have a podcast. And I think that people say that, but if you actually listed the people that that have podcasts, it's probably not too many people. But that's kind of become really popular to think about. And so my perspective is the market is still very young and undersaturated.
You feel like people are going to be listening, more and more people are listening to podcasts.
It's definitely growing. And I will say listenership is growing year over year. And there's a lot of conversation. I personally believe that I'm very pro video in podcasting, but I also think there's going to be a big resurgence in audio only podcasts, just because a lot of younger generations are leaning away from screens more. There's more science coming out that's telling us that staring at a phone for 12 hours a day is actually bad for your brain. And I think people are going to realize that podcasting is still a medium where you can educate yourself, you can entertain yourself without having to be on a screen. You can do it while going on a walk, you can do it while hiking, you can do it while working out. And I think that there's going to be a lot more people that realize we still want to be entertained, but we might not want to be stuck on YouTube all day. And that's where I think podcasting is really secure as a market.
Is the main reason people are tuning in the podcast to be entertained, or is it for learning, knowledge, news? What's the biggest reason?
I don't know. That would be interesting to kind of like see what the surveys are. I think from category perspective, I know that two of the biggest categories in podcasting, most popular, is comedy and news. So those aren't really categories that we work as much in. We usually work in kind of more like education or business content where people are coming to learn something. So in my sphere, a lot of people are using podcasts to learn. They're initially choosing to self-educate on topics, and they're saying, I want to learn about this. I'm going to find a podcast about this. And so that is definitely really common. I don't know if it's more people than are listening to comedy podcasts or whatnot, but there's a lot.
I only know 3 platforms. I'm sure there's more. I know Spotify, I know Apple, I know YouTube. What's the biggest, most popular platform that people go to?
I think all 3 would tell you that it is them. And I've probably actually heard all 3 say that it is them in the last year. So the undeniable fact is that YouTube is becoming way more prominent in podcasting. So that's just happening. Like YouTube has made a really big play into podcasting. If you talk to young people, I would say under the age of 25, they are typically consuming podcasts on YouTube, and they don't really know the other ones exist. So I think younger generations leaning a lot more towards YouTube. A little bit older generations, I would say like legacy podcasters that have kind of known podcasting exists since it started 20 years ago. You're going to have a lot more on Apple Podcasts. But right now it's actually, I would say that usually 85% of consumption happens on those 3 platforms combined. And it's typically kind of split a third. And then that remaining 15% is there's over 200 other ways that people can listen to podcasts on other apps that people can download. And there are millions of people that are listening to podcasts on these other apps that aren't the big 3.
Let's have some fun with this. Here's an opportunity for you to be a little bit judgmental. Let's just say that we're going to take 35-year-olds, males, and a third of them watch podcasts. They listen to podcasts on Spotify, a third on Apple, and a third on YouTube. What's different about those 3 groups of people?
Oh, that's interesting. I would actually say with that demographic, most of them are probably going to be listening on Spotify, but I think that I don't know if I would say that it changes, like that the platform selection is different based on like characteristics about the person or personality. I think that what we see is people that consume content on Apple Podcasts have typically been listening to podcasts for longer. Like they're like legacy listeners. They've known what podcasting is for a while. They've probably had iPhones they've probably been an Apple iPhone user since the beginning. I think Spotify, typically people that listen on Spotify really like being able to have your music and podcast together. And people that are younger, it's like on YouTube, people are going to YouTube for everything. They're typing questions and now there's this whole world of now people are not really going to Google as much. They're going to ChatGPT or Claude. And so how do we create podcasts that actually educate language learning models to feed people our podcasts through AI chat, which is a whole nother world of things.
Let's open that can of worms for a little bit. We had this coaching group that I'm a part of. They brought in some AI experts a couple of years ago and just talked about all the different platforms for AI. And they showed us some advertisements that were 100% AI made. And they showed us a podcast episode that they weren't real people and they weren't real voices, but they were having a conversation it's seemingly just as real as you and I. It makes me want to vomit, but is that happening out there? Are there some podcasts that are gaining traction that aren't real?
So it is definitely happening, and whether or not those podcasts are gaining traction is another question. So there's one company that is kind of pioneering the 100% AI podcasts, and they're releasing about 10,000 episodes every week that are 100% created by AI. And so they have thousands of shows that they're creating these around. A lot of them are around news or different topics. They're kind of bringing written form content into the audio world. I don't think that they sound very good. So I still think that we're a ways away from content that is from audio content that is 100% AI generated, it sounding and being better than human content. The interesting thing about it, whether I like it or not, where I think we will see it take off, is where it's just impractical for humans to create some content. So there's one AI podcast that has blown up, and it's actually on the Epstein files. So when the Epstein files came out, there's 3 million pages of stuff. So you and I can't look through that. We can't do it. And so this guy built an AI agent that initially filtered through and went through all of those documents and then created some narrative podcast episodes strictly based off of the facts of what were in the documents. And so it was a daily episode, a daily podcast where a new episode about different things and different storylines in the Epstein files. And I mean, you could tell it's AI. They say it's AI at the front, but you're kind of able to maybe consume and learn about some content that would otherwise be very challenging for humans to process. I think we'll probably see stuff like that a lot more. I think we'll probably see a lot more daily news briefing podcasts that are 100% AI, which it's we listen to Alexa. A lot of people have Alexa do their daily news briefing, and so maybe those will turn into AI. So it is happening. I don't think that there's not many AI podcasts that are gaining traction right now.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks. That's helpful. What are the 2 or 3 podcasts that you listen to on a weekly basis that are not your clients?
So I listen to the All In podcast pretty much every week. This is the first podcast in a long time that I actually think about I haven't listened to their weekly episode yet. And so they're talking about current events related to business, AI, different innovation. And I think that's really interesting. I'm actually pulling up Spotify right now. And then I would say there's a lot of podcasts. I oversubscribe. So I have a lot of podcasts that I subscribe to. And then I'll typically look in my library and pick a handful of episodes that seem interesting that week. And so there's quite a variety of different podcasts that I'm listening to. And I think podcasters need to realize that's how most people are listening to podcasts. It's a little bit less of like, I love you, Dan, but it's a little bit less of like, okay, Dan published an episode today. I got to go listen to it. It's more of that morning, they might be looking at 10 shows that published episodes that day. And if yours doesn't stand out amongst those 10, they're probably not listening.
You know what? I'm going to put in the show notes every week. Seth Silvers, listen to this episode. Hey, I want to ask you, just as we get ready to wind down, what as you have watched a couple of my episodes, and as you get to be a guest here today, what are a couple of ways that I can improve this show? Anything from the way I speak, the way I look, the questions I ask, the lighting?
I would get that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever done a live critique on the show.
Here we go.
This is great. I would get a microphone. I would figure out your microphone stand. So I would have your microphone a lot closer to your mouth. And so I would figure out a way to...
So it sounds better like this?
Yeah, and you can actually turn down the volume when it's closer. Okay. So right now I'm getting, and your audience probably gets some of your background noise because your mic is far enough away that you have to turn the volume up on that mic. If you're closer to it, then you can kind of like close in the bubble a little bit. So a lot of people, they don't want the microphone to be on camera, but I think it's better to have the microphone closer and on camera and have better audio. And then the other thing you have to figure out with that is you take notes on your desk, and so people hear that in the microphone.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Yeah. So those are two like quick things that I think will make things sound better, is like figuring out and testing some things. And it's probably, if you have your microphone closer, you turn down the volume, your microphone's going to be a lot less sensitive to all the other noise going on.
Just so you know this, Tom has said the same thing to me. Sorry, Tom, but now I'm going to make some changes because Seth carries more weight. You're awesome, but Seth carries. Tom's my editor, by the way. Yeah. So
So I think little things like that. I think, and then from a content perspective, like I know this is a little bit of a unique episode, but I would encourage you to incorporate the concept of Delay the Decay and what that is about into the first couple minutes of the show. So I would dive straight in so that you want to expect that somebody new is coming to is listening to every episode, and they need to know what is Delay the Decay about, and why do I want to stick around and learn about that.
Yeah, so helpful. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
That means a lot. Yeah, and I want to close with this, actually, is that you've been leading for a lot of years and building and creating. And being a leader takes persistence. It takes the right mindset, and it takes living a prioritized life. And we talk, speaking of Delay the Decay, we talk a lot about living the prioritized life. That's how we delay the decay: spiritual, relational, physical, mental, and then financial. Finances oftentimes follow when we're living a prioritized life. You talked about your health in the beginning. How else do you stay in the game and living a sustainable life? You travel a lot. You've got your first child coming. Mm-hmm. You've got a wife that you prioritize. You got friends and family in the area. Just talk to me a little bit as we close down this episode about your fight to live a prioritized life and to continue in the leadership role that God has given you.
I think it's really hard. So, I mean, it is something where, like, I think you mentioned your phrase is direction, not perfection. So I think that's where I'm really encouraged by that. I think that, I definitely, for whatever reason, I feel pretty wired to like think about career and work and opportunities. And so I think that's something that in one way, we set boundaries around, and I try to not work too much. And, we try to, I typically try to not really work past like 5 or 6 at night. And sometimes take other time off. Like last year we took I probably took 6 weeks off for different trips, and that was amazing. And it broke a lot of things in the business, so it didn't even work very well. But it was like, well, like we need to identify like these things. And in other areas, it's actually I've realized that me setting boundaries around work is actually sometimes me avoiding what work needs to be done. And that's actually been an interesting thing over the last year, is to realize like, oh, am I actually procrastinating things that need to be done and then calling it rest or calling it boundaries? And so not that I'm saying I need to work more, but there's certain things that we've realized over the last year, like, oh, I actually need to prioritize these things more. So I think that it is a journey. I think that's kind of some of how we've looked at it on the work side of things. I honestly think podcasts and books are a big piece of it for me too. I love reading. I love learning. And I think that just continuing to learn about new things. I'm always pretty good at the general knowledge round in trivia. And then I have a lot of knowledge about things that probably don't matter, but at some point somebody might ask a trivia question. But I just enjoy learning about new things. And that's part of why I love getting to work on 10, 15, 20 podcasts at a time, because we're getting to get really deep exposure into all these different topics. And I think that's really important, just for us to be continual learners.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. I'm going to circle back as we close. You threw out a phrase earlier that is important to you, and that's sustainable excellence. And a lot of times business leaders talk about excellence. I want to strive for excellence. But what's sustainable excellence based on our individual life rhythms, right? Our relationship with our wife, our friends, our family, our health, and all that. And so I'm going to borrow that from you, that sustainable excellence is what I want to be all about as well. If people want to follow you, Seth, and learn more about your story and even know more about the next step to hiring you, how do they find you?
Yeah, I'd say the best place is probably to head to our website, storyon.co, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Those are kind of the two places that we're going to be kind of following and the most active, but always very happy to connect with people that want to learn about podcasting or that are kind of thinking about or serious about getting a podcast started. And we always tell people we'll either be the ones to help or be able to connect you with other people that can help fill your needs.
Love it. Well, thanks for being a go-giver. Thank you for investing in other people, and me being one of those. It's been fun to see your journey and to see your success. And I bless you in the coming years with this new child coming. So exciting. And I know that you're going to continue to find healthy rhythms in your life, because you're such a self-aware leader. And for my dear audience, it's great to be with you again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And remember, whatever it is you're experiencing, wherever it is you're thinking about, dreaming about, whatever your fears are, remember to take that next step in the right direction and don't get stuck in perfection. So until next time, we'll see you then. Bye-bye.